I noticed my name tag at my granddaughter's wedding before I noticed anything else.
It was a small thing.
Just a rectangular piece of ivory cardstock, tucked neatly into a gold frame at the reception check-in table. Elegant.
Polished.
Perfectly in line with the rest of the event. But the words printed on it didn't belong there. The old lady who's paying for everything. I stood there for a second longer than I should have. The young woman behind the table smiled politely, already reaching for the next guest's card, unaware that something inside me had just shifted, quietly but permanently. I didn't make a scene. I didn't ask for a replacement. I simply picked up the tag, pinned it carefully to my dress, and walked into the ballroom as if nothing was wrong. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end of my story, and if you feel like it, tell me where you're listening from. I've learned that sometimes the quietest moments carry the loudest truths. I had always believed that weddings were supposed to be sacred, not just beautiful, but meaningful, especially this one. My granddaughter, Emily, was getting married that afternoon in a white chapel just outside of Charleston. A place with tall windows, soft light, and rows of polished wooden pews that smelled faintly of lemon oil and thyme. She looked radiant walking down the aisle. Truly radiant. For a moment, sitting there in the second row, I forgot everything else, the years, the distance, the subtle changes in how my family spoke to me. I saw only the little girl who used to run through my backyard in pigtails, chasing butterflies and calling my name. Grandma, look. I had looked. Every time. And I had shown up. Every time. The ceremony was flawless. White roses. A string quartet. Soft laughter during the vows. Even the weather cooperated. 72 degrees, a gentle breeze, sunlight that felt almost intentional. My son, Richard, stood proudly near the front, his hand resting on Emily's shoulder before he gave her away. My daughter-in-law, Pamela, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, performing just the right amount of emotion. From the outside, it looked like a perfect family. And maybe, for a long time, I had tried to believe that it still was. It wasn't until the reception that the illusion began to crack. The ballroom at the Westbrook Hotel was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the ceiling. Round tables dressed in ivory linens filled the space, each centerpiece a careful arrangement of roses and eucalyptus. Everything was tastefully done. Everything was expensive. I knew that better than anyone. I arrived at the reception a little earlier than most guests. Old habit. When you've spent decades making sure everything runs smoothly, holidays, birthdays, graduations, you learn to arrive before things begin. You check details. You fix small problems before they grow. You make sure everyone else can enjoy themselves. Even now, at 68, I still carried that instinct. I walked toward the check-in table, smiling politely, adjusting the soft blue shawl around my shoulders. It was the same shade my husband used to say brought out my eyes. Robert had been gone for 3 years, but I still dressed as if he might notice. That must be Mrs. Edwards, the young woman at the table said brightly, flipping through a neat stack of cards. Yes, I replied. She handed it to me with a smile. And that's when I saw it. The old lady who's paying for everything. I remember thinking very clearly, this must be a mistake. Not outrage. Not anger. Just confusion. Because surely no one would choose those words. Not here. Not today. Is something wrong? The young woman asked, noticing my pause. I forced a small smile. The kind you learn to give when you don't want to make other people uncomfortable. There seems to be a mix-up, I said gently. But it's all right. She offered to look for another card. I told her not to worry. And I meant that. At least I thought I did. I pinned the tag to my dress, right over my heart. Then I walked into the ballroom. At first, no one said anything. Or if they did, they said it quietly. Too quietly. I moved from table to table, greeting familiar faces. Old friends of my late husband, distant relatives. A few neighbors I hadn't seen in years. Some smiled warmly. Others hesitated. There's a particular kind of glance people give when they've noticed something they're not sure how to react to. Their eyes flicker downward, then back up. A pause just a second too long. I saw that look more than once. During the cocktail hour, I stood near one of the tall windows, holding a glass of sparkling water I had no intention of drinking. I told myself I was overthinking it, that perhaps it really was a printing error, that maybe someone had meant it as a joke, an awkward, poorly executed joke. Families do that sometimes. They cross lines without realizing it. They forget that certain words don't land the way they think they will. But then I heard it. Two women standing just behind me, their voices lowered, but not enough. "Did you see her name tag?" A soft laugh. "I mean, Pamela said it would be funny, but I didn't think they'd actually go through with it." "Well, she is the one paying for all this, isn't she?" Another laugh. "Still, it's a bit much." I didn't turn around. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I simply stood there, staring out at the manicured gardens beyond the glass, where guests were beginning to gather for photos. And in that moment, something settled inside me. Not a storm. Not even anger. Just clarity. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. And it certainly wasn't harmless. I thought about the past year. The quiet conversations about budgets. The subtle suggestions. "Mom, you know how important this day is for Emily. We just want everything to be perfect. And you've always been so generous." I had said yes. Of course I had. For Emily. Always for Emily. The venue. The catering.
The dress.
The flowers. Even the band that was now tuning their instruments on the small stage near the dance floor. Piece by piece, check by check, I had made sure my granddaughter's wedding would be everything she dreamed of. I hadn't kept track of the total.
I didn't want to.
Because love, when it's real, isn't supposed to feel like a transaction. But standing there, with that name tag pinned neatly to my chest, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. To them, it had been exactly that. A transaction. I was no longer the center of anything. Not the heart of the family. Not even a respected elder. I was a role. A function.
A source.
An ATM with a smile. I took a slow breath, set my untouched glass down on a nearby table, and adjusted my shoulders. Across the room, I saw my son laughing with a group of guests. Pamela stood beside him, radiant in a designer gown. I recognized immediately. I had paid for that too. For a brief moment, I wondered what Robert would have said if he were here. He had always seen things more clearly than I did. "Kindness is a gift," he used to tell me, "but not everyone deserves unlimited access to it." I think, deep down, I had always known that. I just hadn't wanted to believe it applied to my own family. But as the music began to play, and the guests took their seats, I realized something else. Something quieter. And far more dangerous. They thought this was funny. They thought it was harmless. They thought I would smile just like I always had and keep giving. I did smile. But for the first time in a very long time, it wasn't for them. I didn't leave the reception. That would have been the old version of me. The one who quietly stepped away, who chose dignity over discomfort, who told herself, "It's not worth it."
No.
I stayed. I found my assigned table, even though my fingers brushed against the edge of that name tag once more before I sat down, as if confirming it was still there, still real. Table 6, near the center of the room. A good seat. Of course it was. I had paid for that too. The chair felt colder than I expected. Or maybe that was just me. I smoothed the fabric of my dress before sitting, the same careful gesture I'd done 1,000 times at family gatherings, Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas mornings, birthday parties where I made sure everyone else had what they needed before I even thought about myself. Old habits don't disappear overnight, even when something inside you already has. "Mrs. Edwards, you look lovely." I looked up to see Martha Anderson approaching the table, her husband just behind her. Old acquaintances of Robert's. Kind people. The type who still believed in manners. "Thank you, Martha," I said, offering a small smile. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, toward my chest. There it was again. That pause. That hesitation. "I love your name tag," she added carefully. The way she said it told me everything. She didn't. But she didn't know how to acknowledge it without making it worse. I nodded, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. It's quite memorable, I replied. That seemed to be enough. People like Martha don't push. They retreat when things feel uncomfortable. And tonight, I was beginning to understand just how uncomfortable my presence had become. Dinner was served shortly after. Plates of filet mignon and roasted vegetables, arranged beautifully, carried out in perfect timing by a team of waitstaff who moved like choreography. Everything was flawless. Everything was expensive. Everything had my fingerprints on it, even if no one chose to say that out loud. Across the room, I could hear laughter. Not warm laughter. Not the kind that wraps around you and makes you feel included. This was sharper, lighter. The kind that floats just above you, not with you. Mom. Richard's voice cut through the noise as he approached, a glass of wine in his hand. He leaned down, kissed my cheek quickly, too quickly, and pulled back before I could even respond. "You're doing okay?" he asked. I studied his face. There was something different there. Not cruelty. Not exactly. But something close to distance. "I'm fine," I said. He nodded, relieved by the simplicity of that answer. "Good, good. Big day, right?" he added, gesturing vaguely toward the room. "Big day. Yes. For Emily. For the guests. For the celebration. Not for me." I tilted my head slightly. "Richard," I said calmly, "who came up with the name tags?" It was a simple question. Softly delivered.
No accusation.
No edge. He laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, that," he said, waving his hand as if it were nothing. "Just a little joke." Pamela thought it would lighten things up. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him. Really looked at him. This was my son. The boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and insist they were bouquets. The teenager who once told me I was the strongest person he knew. The man standing in front of me now couldn't even see what he had just said. "It's humiliating," I said quietly. The words didn't come out sharp. They didn't need to. His smile faded, but only slightly. "Mom, come on," he sighed. "Don't take it so seriously. Everyone knows you've been helping out. It's just, recognition." Recognition. I almost smiled at that. "I didn't realize I needed to be labeled for it," I replied. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable now. "Look, Pamela put a lot of work into this," he said, lowering his voice. "Let's not make a big deal out of something small, okay?" Something small. I nodded slowly. "Of course," I said, because that's what I had always done. Minimized my own discomfort to preserve everyone else's comfort. "Good," he said quickly, clearly eager to move on. "I've got to get back. They're about to start the speeches." And just like that, he was gone. Back to the center of the room. Back to the life where everything made sense. I sat there for a long moment after he left. The food in front of me untouched. The music rising softly in the background. Voices blending into a hum that no longer felt like it belonged to me. I reached for my napkin. Folded it once. Then again.
Carefully. Precisely.
The way I used to fold Richard's shirts when he was little. The way I had folded Emily's baby blankets. Across the room, Pamela stood near the head table, laughing with a group of women. Confident.
Composed. Perfect.
She caught my eye for a brief second. And in that moment I saw it. Not guilt. Not even discomfort. Satisfaction. That was when the last piece fell into place. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like a lock clicking shut. This wasn't a joke that went too far. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't even carelessness. This was intentional. And worse than that, it had been building for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to see it. I glanced down at my plate again. Perfectly cooked. Perfectly presented. Completely untouched. Then, slowly, I lifted my head. Not toward the stage. Not toward the guests. But toward the exits. For the first time that evening, I wasn't wondering how to endure the night. I was beginning to wonder how much longer I intended to play my role in it. The speeches began right after dinner. One by one, people stood up, took the microphone, and said all the right things.
About love.
About family. About how beautiful everything was. I listened. Of course I did. I had spent most of my life listening. Emily's maid of honor went first. A childhood friend. She told stories about sleepovers, late-night talks, dreams about the future. People laughed. People clapped. It was warm, genuine, the kind of speech that belongs at a wedding. Then Richard stood up. My son. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and smiled out at the room like he had done 100 times before at business events, charity dinners, company meetings. Confident.
Polished.
Comfortable. Tonight, he began, is about celebrating love, commitment, and the people who made this day possible. A small pause. Just long enough to feel intentional. And we couldn't have done this without the incredible support of family. He gestured lightly across the room. General. Safe. Then his eyes moved briefly toward me. And for a second, I thought maybe he would say something real. But especially, he continued, smiling wider now, we all know who really made this wedding happen. A few people chuckled. Not loud. Not forced. Just enough. I felt it before he said it. That same quiet shift. That same tightening in my chest. He raised his glass slightly. To the one who made sure every detail was perfect, another pause. Our very own, he laughed softly. Family sponsor. The room responded. Not with shock. Not with silence. But with polite laughter.
Soft.
Acceptable. Socially appropriate. I didn't move. I didn't react. I simply sat there, my hands folded in my lap, my back straight, my face calm. The way you learn to sit when you realize you are being watched, but not truly seen. Family sponsor. Not mother. Not grandmother. Not the woman who held this family together for decades. A role. A function. A title that made everything easier for them. Richard continued speaking, moving on to Emily and her husband, to love and future and happiness. The room followed him. They always do. People follow the person holding the microphone. But I wasn't listening anymore. Because something had become very clear. This wasn't just between Pamela and me. This wasn't just one careless decision. Richard knew. Maybe not at first. Maybe not when the idea was mentioned casually over coffee or during one of those quiet planning conversations.
But he knew now.
He had seen the name tag. He had heard the whispers. He had just repeated it, refined it, softened it, turned it into something the room could laugh at without feeling guilty. And he had chosen to stand with it. I exhaled slowly.
Not sharply.
Not dramatically. Just enough to steady myself. Across the table, Martha Anderson shifted slightly in her seat. I'm so sorry, she murmured under her breath. I turned my head just enough to meet her eyes.
She meant it.
People like Martha always do. It's all right, I said. And for the first time that evening, I realized I wasn't saying that to comfort her. I was saying it because something inside me had already moved past the point of hurt. When you expect kindness, cruelty surprises you. But when you finally understand the pattern, there's no surprise left. Only recognition. The speeches ended. Applause filled the room. Glasses clinked. Music began again, a slow instrumental piece meant to guide the couple into their first dance. Everyone stood. Everyone turned toward the center of the room. I remained seated, just for a moment longer, because I needed that moment, not to gather strength. I already had that, but to let the truth settle completely. For years, I had told myself small stories. They're busy. They don't mean it. It's just the way things are now. Little explanations that made everything easier to accept. But tonight stripped all of that away. There is a difference between being overlooked and being used. And I had just heard the difference spoken out loud, into a microphone, in a room full of witnesses. I stood up slowly, smoothed my dress again, adjusted the name tag, still pinned neatly where I'd placed it. Then I did something I hadn't done all evening. I looked around the room. Really looked. At the tables. At the guests. At the decorations. At the stage. At everything I had helped create. It was beautiful. There was no denying that. But beauty, I realized, doesn't erase intention. It only decorates it. The music softened as Emily and her husband took their place on the dance floor. She looked happy.
Truly happy.
And for a moment that mattered. Because none of this was her fault. I held on to that thought. Carefully. Deliberately. Then I stepped away from my chair, not toward the dance floor, not toward the crowd, but toward the side of the room, toward a quieter space, not to escape,
but to think.
because for the first time that night, I wasn't asking myself how to get through the evening. I was asking something much more important. What exactly was I going to do next? I didn't go far, just to the edge of the room, near a set of tall glass doors that opened out to the garden. The music from inside softened there, filtered through laughter and clinking glasses until it became something distant, almost irrelevant. Outside, the evening had settled in. Soft lights lined the pathway. A few guests had stepped out for air, their voices low, their movements unhurried. It was quieter here.
Cleaner.
I preferred it. I rested my hand lightly on the back of an empty chair and stood there for a moment, looking out, not thinking, not reacting, just letting everything settle. It's strange, the way clarity arrives. Not with noise, not with emotion, but with silence. And in that silence, memories started to surface. Not the big ones, not the milestones everyone talks about, but the small ones. The ones that don't seem important until they suddenly are. Pamela's voice, months ago. We want something elegant, Mom. Not over the top, just tasteful. I had nodded. Of course. Then later, the venue is a bit more than we expected, but it's perfect for Emily. Another nod. Another check. It would mean a lot if you could help with the dress. Just this once. Just this once. I closed my eyes briefly. That phrase had appeared more times than I could count. Always gentle, always reasonable, always temporary, and yet it had never really stopped. I opened my eyes again. The garden lights flickered softly in the distance. Inside, applause rose briefly, probably the end of the first dance. I thought about the past few years. After Robert passed, how quickly things had shifted. Not all at once. Never that obvious. At first, it was small. Pamela taking more control of family plans. Richard deferring to her more often. Decisions being made then explained to me afterward. Less stress for you, Mom. That way you don't have to worry. I had believed them. Or maybe I had chosen to, because the alternative was harder to face. That I was slowly being moved out of the center of my own family. Replaced. Not completely. Not officially. But enough. I exhaled slowly and adjusted the shawl around my shoulders. The evening air had cooled just slightly. Or maybe I was just more aware of it now. You all right out here? The voice came from my left.
Calm. Familiar.
I turned my head. It was Daniel, Robert's younger brother. I hadn't seen him since the funeral. I said. And this time it wasn't automatic. It was measured. He stepped closer, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable in the soft light. I saw the name tag, he said.
No hesitation. No softening.
Just the truth. I nodded once. That makes two of us. He let out a quiet breath. That wasn't an accident. I know. We stood there for a moment, side by side, both looking out at the same garden, both seeing something very different. Robert wouldn't have allowed this, he said after a while. Simple.
Direct.
I felt that. Not as pain, but as confirmation. No, I agreed. He wouldn't have. Daniel shifted slightly, then reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. For what it's worth, he said, pulling out a small folded document. I think you should take a look at this. I didn't reach for it right away. I just looked at it. What is it? I asked. Something Robert asked me to hold on to, he replied. In case things ever fell off. Fell off. That was one way to put it. Slowly, I took the document from his hand. The paper was thicker than normal. Legal.
Familiar.
I didn't think I'd ever need to give it to you, Daniel added. But after tonight, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I unfolded it carefully. The noise from inside the ballroom faded even more as my eyes moved across the page. It was Robert's handwriting at the top. Then signatures. Then terms.
Clear. Precise.
Unmistakable. I read it once. Then again.
Slower.
And with each line, something inside me didn't break. It aligned. Every quiet doubt I had pushed aside. Every moment I had dismissed. Every instinct I had ignored. They all found their place. I folded the document back up. Neatly.
Carefully.
Does Richard know about this? I asked. Daniel shook his head.
No.
Robert was very specific about that. Of course he was. I held the paper in my hands for a moment longer. Not tightly. Not protectively. Just knowingly. Inside, the music shifted again. Faster now. Louder. The kind that fills a room and leaves no space for silence. I looked back through the glass doors. At the people. At the movement. At the celebration. At the life that had continued with or without me. They think I'll keep playing along, I said quietly. Daniel didn't respond.
He didn't need to.
Because for the first time that night, I wasn't thinking about what they had done. I was thinking about what Robert had prepared, and what I was about to do with it. I slipped the document into my handbag, adjusted the strap on my shoulder. Then I turned back toward the ballroom. Not as the woman who had walked in earlier that evening, but as someone who finally understood the full picture. And this time, I wasn't walking back in to endure anything. I was walking back in with a plan. Need to hurry anymore. The music had picked up, something upbeat, something meant to pull people onto the dance floor. Laughter came easier now. Glasses were being refilled. Conversations grew louder, looser. From the outside, it looked like the night was only getting better. Inside me, something had already changed. I returned to my table, but I didn't sit down right away. Instead, I let my hand rest lightly on the back of the chair, my eyes moving across the room. Not searching, not reacting, just observing. It's easier to see things clearly when you stop trying to be part of them. Pamela was near the center now, surrounded by a small circle of guests. She moved effortlessly, smiling, laughing, adjusting details with the ease of someone who believed she was in control of everything. And maybe she was. Up until now. Richard stood a few feet away, speaking with one of his business associates. His posture was relaxed, confident. The same man who had just turned me into a joke with a microphone now looked perfectly at ease in a room built on my generosity. I didn't feel anger. That surprised me. What I felt was distance.
Clean.
Quiet. Final. I sat down slowly and reached for my glass of water. This time I took a sip. Small. Measured. Across from me, Martha gave me a gentle look. You're holding up remarkably well, she said softly. I met her eyes. I've had practice, I replied. She didn't ask what I meant. Some things don't need to be explained. I placed the glass back on the table and let my fingers rest lightly against the stem. Then, without drawing attention, I opened my handbag just slightly. The folded document was still there, exactly where I had placed it. Robert's handwriting, his foresight, his quiet understanding of people, even when I chose not to see it. I closed the bag again, not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't need to look at it anymore. I already knew what it meant. A voice came from behind me. Mom, there you are.
Pamela.
I turned my head slowly. She looked flawless up close.
Not a single detail out of place.
Makeup perfect. Hair perfectly set. Smile perfectly measured. We were looking for you, she continued, her tone light, almost warm. You disappeared for a bit. I stepped outside, I said. She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Well, we're about to do the cake cutting, she added. Emily wants everyone close by. Of course she did. Emily had always wanted everyone together. I'll be there, I said. Pamela's eyes flickered briefly, downward. To the name tag. There it was again. That almost smile. That subtle acknowledgement. Not apology. Not regret. Ownership. You know, she said, lowering her voice just slightly, people are talking about it. I'm sure they are, I replied. It's actually getting a lot of laughs, she added, as if offering reassurance. It lightens the mood. I looked at her. Really looked at her. For whom? I asked. The question wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. She paused. Just for a second. Then she smiled again. Well, you know how these things are, she said lightly. Weddings can get a little stiff. I nodded once. Yes, I said. They can. There was a moment there. A A small one, where she seemed to be waiting for something. A reaction. A complaint. A request. Something she could manage. But I didn't give her anything. "Shall we?" she said finally, gesturing toward the center of the room. "Yes," I replied, standing up. We walked side by side for a few steps. Not together. Just in the same direction. As we approached the cake table, the crowd began to gather. Emily stood there, glowing, her hand resting lightly on her husband's arm. The cake behind them was tall, elegant, decorated with cascading white flowers. Beautiful.
Perfect.
I took my place among the guests. Not at the front. Not at the center. Just close enough. The photographer adjusted his position. "All right, everyone, let's get a little closer," he called out. "Family in the front, please. Family." I felt Pamela's hand lightly touch my arm. "Right here," she said, guiding me a step forward. "For the photo. For the image. For the moment." I stepped where she indicated. Stood where I was placed. The camera flashed once. Then again. And as I stood there, smiling just enough, I realized something very simple. They still thought this was under control. That the roles were fixed. That I would continue exactly as I always had. Reliable. Predictable. Available. The photographer lowered his camera. "Perfect," he said. "That's a beautiful family. Beautiful." I held that word in my mind for a second, then let it go. Because beauty, I had learned, can exist right alongside truth. And the truth was this moment, the smiles, the laughter, the perfect arrangement. It was built on something they didn't fully understand.
Not yet.
The cake cutting began. Applause followed. Music swelled again. And I stood there, quietly, with my hands resting in front of me, my posture straight, my expression calm. No one noticed the shift. No one saw the decision forming, because it didn't look like much. Just a woman, standing still, watching her family celebrate. But inside, something had already been set in motion. And this time, I wasn't going to explain it. I was going to let them experience it. The cake was cut. People clapped. Someone cheered a little too loudly. And just like that, the moment passed, folded neatly into the evening like everything else that had been carefully arranged. I stepped back. Not abruptly. Not noticeably. Just enough to move out of the center of things again. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne. I took a glass this time. Not because I wanted it, but because it gave my hands something to do. The music shifted again. Louder now. Faster. The kind of music that fills space so people don't have to. Emily and her husband were pulled onto the dance floor. Then others followed. Richard.
Pamela. Friends.
Family. The floor filled quickly. Movement. Laughter.
Noise.
I stayed where I was. At the edge. Watching. There's a moment in every room like that when you realize no one is looking at you anymore. Not out of cruelty. Just because they don't need to. I took a small sip of the champagne.
Dry.
Cold. Forgettable. "Mrs. Edwards?" I turned. A man in a dark suit stood a few steps away, holding a folder under his arm. Mid-40s, maybe. Professional. Polite. "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he added, lowering his voice slightly. "I was asked to confirm something with you regarding the final vendor payments." "Of course." I nodded once. "Who sent you?" "Mrs. Pamela Edwards," he replied. "She mentioned you would be handling the remaining balances tonight." Tonight. I let that word settle for a moment. "What balances?" I asked. He opened the folder, flipping through a few pages. Catering adjustments, extended venue hours, additional floral arrangements, and the band overtime. "It comes to," he paused, checking the number again. "Just under 48,000.
I didn't react.
Not outwardly. $48,000. At a wedding that had already been fully funded. "And she expects that to be settled tonight?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am," he said, a bit more cautiously now. "That was my understanding." I nodded slowly. "Of course it was." He shifted slightly, unsure. "I can come back later if this isn't a good time." "No," I said gently. "This is a perfect time." Because it was. I set my champagne glass down on a nearby table. Carefully, deliberately. Then I opened my handbag. Not rushed. Not hesitant. The document Daniel had given me was still there. Folded. Waiting. But I didn't take it out. Not yet. Instead, I reached for something else. My checkbook. The man straightened slightly, relieved. Of course he was. This was how it had always gone. I opened it, flipped to a blank page, clicked the pen once, and then I stopped. Just for a second. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I wanted to be very clear about it. For the record, I said quietly, looking up at him, who authorized these additional charges? He glanced down at the paperwork again. Mrs. Pamela Edwards, he repeated. I nodded. Of course. I closed the checkbook. The man blinked. I'm sorry, he said, confused. I won't be covering those expenses, I replied. The words were calm, simple, final. There was a brief silence between us. The kind that doesn't quite belong in a room full of music and laughter. I may have misunderstood, he said carefully. She indicated that you had agreed to handle all costs associated with the wedding. I handled what I agreed to, I said. Nothing more. He hesitated, clearly unsure how to proceed. I'll need to clarify this with her, he said. That would be best, I replied. He nodded quickly and stepped away, disappearing into the crowd. I watched him go. Not with concern, not with doubt, just with quiet awareness. Because I knew exactly what would happen next. Across the room, Pamela was still on the dance floor, laughing,
Spinning.
completely unaware.
For now.
I picked up my champagne glass again, took another small sip, and waited. It didn't take long. I saw the man approach her.
Lean in.
Speak quietly. I saw the shift almost immediately. Her smile paused, just for a fraction of a second. Then she laughed again, shook her head, said something dismissive.
He spoke again.
More firmly this time. And that's when it happened. Her expression changed. Not dramatically. Not enough for most people to notice. But I noticed. Because I was watching. Because I had been watching all night. Her eyes moved. Searching. Scanning the room. Until they found me. We held that look for a moment. Across the distance. Across the noise. Across everything that had been carefully staged. She didn't smile this time. Neither did I. Then she said something to Richard.
Quick.
Sharp. And just like that, they were both moving toward me. I didn't move. I didn't adjust my posture. I didn't prepare an explanation. I simply stood there.
Calm. Still.
Because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't reacting to their decisions. They were about to react to mine. Pamela reached me first. Of course she did. Her heels moved quickly across the floor, controlled but urgent. Richard followed just behind her, his expression already tightening in that familiar way, somewhere between confusion and quiet irritation. They stopped a few feet in front of me. Not too close. Just enough to keep things contained. Mom, Richard said, his voice low. What's going on? I didn't answer right away. I let the question sit there for a moment. Pamela didn't wait. There seems to be some confusion with the payments, she said smoothly, her tone still composed, but thinner now. The coordinator just told me you refused to settle the remaining balance. I nodded once. That's correct. A brief silence. Not long, but long enough. Richard let out a small breath, the kind people use when they're trying to stay patient. Mom, he said softer now. We talked about this. You said you were taking care of the wedding. I did, I replied. Pamela's smile returned, but it wasn't the same one from earlier. This one was tighter, measured. Then I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding, she said lightly. There were a few last-minute adjustments. Nothing major. $48,000, I said. The number hung in the air between us. Her expression didn't break, but something behind it did.
It's a wedding, she said.
Things come up. Yes, I agreed. They do. Richard glanced between us, his patience starting to thin. Can we not do this right now? He muttered. We're in the middle of the reception. I looked at him.
Calm. Steady.
That didn't seem to matter earlier, I said. He frowned slightly. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gesture. I simply touched the edge of a name tag pinned to my dress. Just once. Pamela's eyes followed the movement. Oh, come on, she said quickly, almost dismissive. You're still on that?
Still.
I let that word settle. It's not about the tag, I said. Then what is it about? Richard asked, his tone sharper now. I looked at both of them. Really looked. At what point, I said quietly, did I stop being part of this family and become its funding source? The question didn't land loudly, but it landed. Richard's expression shifted. Not to understanding. Not yet. To be fair, he said slowly, you offered to help. I did, I replied. And we appreciated that, he added a little more firmly now. But this reaction, it feels unnecessary. Unnecessary. Pamela stepped in again, her voice softer now, more controlled. We're not trying to take advantage of you, she said. This is for Emily. For her future. I nodded. I know. And you've always said you wanted the best for her, she continued.
Ida.
There was a pause. A small one. Then I asked a question. Did Emily ask for this?
I said.
Pamela blinked. Just once. What do you mean? She replied. The extra costs, I said. The changes. The extensions. The things I wasn't told about. Silence. Richard looked at Pamela. Pamela didn't look back. It was a joint decision, she said finally. I held her gaze. No, I said. Not louder. Just clearer. It wasn't. Something shifted then. Subtle, but real. Because for the first time in this conversation, they realized I wasn't guessing. I knew. Richard's tone changed. Softer. More careful. Mom, he said, this isn't the time for this kind of conversation. I nodded. You're right, I said. Relief flickered across his face. Too quickly. But it is the time for decisions, I continued. That relief disappeared just as fast. I reached down and picked up my handbag. Held it lightly in my hands. I covered everything I agreed to, I said. And I did it without conditions. I paused. Just long enough. But I won't be covering anything else. Pamela's composure cracked, just slightly. You're putting us in a very difficult position, she said, her voice lower now, more strained. I tilted my head.
No, irraplia.
I'm stepping out of one. Richard ran a hand through his hair, frustration starting to show. This is not like you, he said. I almost smiled. You're right, I said. It isn't. Because the version of me they were used to would have already signed the check. Apologized for the delay. Smoothed everything over. That version of me had been very convenient. But she wasn't standing here anymore. The music continued behind us. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. The night moved forward as if nothing had changed. But something had. Pamela straightened slightly, regaining control of her expression.
Fine, she said.
We'll figure something out. I nodded. I'm sure you will. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Richard spoke again. Quieter. Is this really about money? He asked. I looked at him. No, I said. It stopped being about money a long time ago. And for the first time since they walked up to me, neither of them had a response. I adjusted my shawl slightly, smoothed the fabric at my wrist. Then I stepped past them. Not quickly, not dramatically, just forward, leaving them standing there, in the middle of a celebration that suddenly didn't feel as effortless as it had a few minutes ago. I didn't look back, because I knew something they were only just beginning to understand. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a shift, and it had already begun. I didn't go back to my table. Not right away. Instead, I kept walking, slowly, steadily, along the edge of the ballroom, past clusters of guests who were too busy enjoying the evening to notice anything had shifted. That was the thing about moments like this. They rarely look dramatic from the outside. A laugh here, a toast there, music rising, glasses clinking. And in between all of it, something quiet, irreversible unfolding. I stopped near one of the tall columns by the far wall. From there, I could see everything. The dance floor, the head table, the bar, and, most importantly, Richard and Pamela. They hadn't returned to the dance floor. Not yet. Instead, they stood off to the side, speaking in low voices.
Close. Tense.
Pamela's posture was still controlled, but her hands were no longer still. She gestured slightly as she spoke. Short movements.
Sharp.
Richard listened, his jaw tightening just enough to notice if you were looking closely. They weren't smiling anymore.
Good.
I didn't feel satisfaction. Not exactly. But I did feel confirmation. Because for the first time that night, the balance had shifted. Not loudly. Not publicly. But enough. A few minutes later, Richard broke away and walked toward the bar. Pamela stayed where she was, her eyes scanning the room again. Searching. She found me quickly.
Of course she did.
This time, she didn't come over. She just looked, held my gaze. And then she looked away first. That told me everything I needed to know. I turned my attention back to the room. The music had slowed again. Another dance beginning. Couples moving in gentle circles, soft lights reflecting off polished floors. At the center of it all, Emily laughed as her husband spun her lightly.
Carefree.
Unaware. I watched her for a moment, long enough to remind myself of something important. This was never about her. And it never would be. I reached for my phone. Not urgently. Not nervously. Just intentionally. There were a few messages waiting. Nothing important. Then I scrolled to a name I hadn't contacted in a while. Mr. Callahan. Robert's attorney. My fingers hovered over the screen for just a second. Not because I was unsure, but because I understood exactly what this meant. Then I typed, "Are you available tomorrow morning? I'd like to review the estate documents Robert left." I read it once. Then sent it.
No hesitación.
No second thoughts. I slipped the phone back into my bag. That was it.
No annoncement.
No warning.
Just a small action.
But I knew it wouldn't stay small for long. A server passed by with a fresh tray of drinks. I declined this time. I didn't need anything to hold. Across the room, Richard returned from the bar, drink in hand. He said something to Pamela. She responded quickly. Too quickly.
Then,
they both looked around again. Not casually.
Carefully.
Measuring. Trying to understand something they couldn't quite see yet. That's the thing about control. People only notice it when they start to lose it. I adjusted the strap of my handbag on my shoulder. Felt the folded document inside. Still there. Still quiet. But no longer passive. "Mrs. Edwards?" I turned slightly. It was the event coordinator again. The same man from earlier. "I spoke with Mrs. Edwards," he said, choosing his words carefully now. "She asked me to give her a few minutes." "I'm sure she did," I replied. He hesitated, then added, "I just wanted to confirm your position hasn't changed?" I met his eyes. "It hasn't." He nodded once. Professional. Respectful. "Understood," he said, before stepping away again. No pressure.
No persuasión.
Just acknowledgement. And that, more than anything, told me the shift was real. Because even he could see it now. I looked back toward the dance floor. The music swelled again. Laughter returned. From a distance, nothing had changed. But I knew better. Because I could feel it. The small fractures beneath the surface. The tension threading through the room, just out of sight. Pamela moved again. This time toward the coordinator. Richard followed. Their movements quicker now. Less composed. They were trying to fix it. Of course they were. That's what people do when something stops going their way. They adjust. They manage. They try to bring things back under control. But control, once broken, doesn't return the same way. I watched them for a moment longer. Then I looked away, because my focus had already shifted somewhere else. Tomorrow. The documents. Robert's plan. My decision. All of it waiting. All of it clear. I wasn't thinking about how tonight would end anymore. That part didn't matter. Because the real change wasn't happening in this room. It was already set in motion beyond it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something steady. Not anger. Not sadness.
Control.
Quiet.
Certain. Mine.
I didn't check my phone again. Not when it buzzed softly in my bag about 20 minutes later. Not when I felt the slight vibration against my arm as I stood near the edge of the room. I already knew who it was. Instead, I kept my eyes on the dance floor. Emily was still there, laughing, her dress catching the light as she turned. Her husband leaned in close, whispering something that made her smile wider. That part was real, untouched.
Good.
Because everything else around it was starting to shift. Pamela and Richard had moved away from the center again. Not dancing, not socializing, working. That's what it looked like now. They spoke to the coordinator, then to someone from the catering staff, then back to each other. Short conversations, quick exchanges, tight smiles. From a distance, it could still pass as normal, but only if you weren't paying attention. And I was. A few guests had started to notice. Not the details, just the change in energy. A pause and laughter here. A glance there. Nothing obvious, but enough. That's how these things begin. Not with a scene, but with a shift. Loretta? I turned.
It was Daniel again.
You seem different, he said. I almost smiled. I am, I replied. He nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something he had already suspected. They're scrambling, he added quietly, glancing toward Richard and Pamela. I know. Are you all right with how this is playing out? He asked. It was a fair question. I considered it for a moment. Not emotionally.
Practically.
Yes, I said. Because I was. For the first time that night. I wasn't reacting. I was allowing. And there's a difference. Daniel studied me for a second longer, then gave a small nod. Robert would have been proud of this version of you, he said.
I didn't respond to that.
Not because it didn't matter, but because it did. And I didn't trust myself to unpack that feeling here.
Not now.
Another vibration from my bag.
Softer this time.
I reached in and pulled out my phone. One message. Mr. Callahan. I'll be in the office at 9 a.m. Bring everything Robert left you. I read it once. Then again. Bring everything. I looked down at my handbag. At the outline of the document inside. Then I typed back. I will.
Simple. Clear. Done.
I slipped the phone away again. Across the room, Pamela finally broke from the coordinator and walked straight toward me. No hesitation this time. Richard followed. Again. But something was different now. They weren't composed anymore. Not fully. Pamela stopped in front of me. We are talking, I said. She glanced briefly around the room, then leaned in slightly. Privately, she added. I considered it, then shook my head. No, that answer landed harder than anything I had said all night. Her expression tightened. This isn't the place for this, she said. I tilted my head slightly. It seemed like the perfect place earlier. I replied. Richard stepped in. Mom, please, he said, his voice low, strained now. We just need to fix this situation.
Fix.
I let that word sit for a second. What situation? I asked. Pamela exhaled slowly. The payments, she said. The vendors are asking questions. People are noticing delays. Of course they were. That sounds like something you should handle, I replied. We're trying to handle it, she said, her composure slipping just a little. But this isn't what we agreed on. I looked at her. Steady. No, I said. It isn't. Silence. Then Richard spoke again. More directly this time. Are you really going to do this right now? He asked. I met his eyes. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm simply not doing what I didn't agree to. Another pause. Longer now. Heavier. Pamela's voice dropped lower. If you don't step in, this is going to reflect badly on all of us, she said. All of us. I almost smiled at that. It already has, I replied. That landed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Because there was nothing left to soften. Nothing left to reframe. Just the truth. Around us, the music continued. Guests moved. Laughter returned in small pockets. But here, in this small space between the three of us, everything had gone still. Richard ran a hand across his face. Frustrated now. I don't understand why you're making this so difficult, he said. I held his gaze. I don't understand why you thought I would notice, I replied. That was it. That was the moment. because something in his expression changed. Not anger, not frustration, recognition. Small, fleeting, but real. Pamela straightened slightly, regaining what control she could. Fine, she said. We'll deal with it ourselves. I nodded. I know you will. Another silence. Then they turned, walked away. Faster this time. No performance.
No composure.
Just movement. I watched them go for a second, then looked back at the room. Nothing had collapsed. Nothing had fallen apart. The night was still intact, but something underneath it had shifted permanently. And this time, they felt it too. The music didn't stop. That was the first thing I noticed. Even after they walked away, even after the tension had settled into something heavier, the music kept playing. A fast song now.
Loud. Bright.
Almost forced.
People were still dancing.
Still laughing. Still holding on to the version of the night they had arrived for. But it wasn't the same anymore. You could feel it. Not everywhere. Not all at once. Just in pockets. Near the bar. By the coordinator's table. At the edges of conversations where voices lowered just a little too quickly when someone new stepped in. I stayed where I was.
Still. Calm.
Watching. Pamela moved quickly now. From one vendor to another. Her smile returned, but it didn't reach her eyes anymore. Richard stayed close behind her. Less confident. More reactive. At one point, I saw him pull out his phone, scroll quickly, then shake his head. Numbers. Transfers. Limits. Reality. They were trying to fix it quietly. Of course they were. That's what people do when the image matters more than the truth. But weddings, especially ones built on appearances, don't leave much room for error. And tonight, the margin had disappeared. Ladies and gentlemen, the DJ's voice cut through the room, cheerful, controlled. We're going to take a quick moment for a special thank you before we continue the celebration. A thank you. I didn't move, but I watched. Pamela froze. Just for a second. Then she smiled again. Turned. Walked toward the stage. Of course.
Control.
She took the microphone with practiced ease. I just wanted to say a few words, she began, her voice smooth, steady. Tonight has been absolutely perfect, and we are so grateful to everyone who made this day possible. Applause.
Polite.
Expected. She glanced out at the room. Her eyes passed over me once.
Quickly.
Then continued. Weddings like this don't happen without a lot of love and a lot of support, she said. Careful. Measured. I especially want to thank our family for coming together to create something so beautiful for Emily. General. Safe. No names. Not this time. I tilted my head slightly. Interesting. Because earlier, they had no problem making it personal. Now they were adjusting. Pamela continued for another minute or so. Gratitude.
Joy. Future.
All the right words. Then she handed the microphone back. The music returned. Louder. But something had shifted again. Because now people had noticed. Not everything. Not the details. But enough. Enough to feel that something wasn't quite aligned. I saw it in the way a few guests looked toward the vendor table. In the way conversations paused just a little longer. In the way Richard stayed near Pamela instead of drifting back into the crowd. The night was still standing. But it wasn't effortless anymore. And that mattered. I reached into my handbag again. This time, I took the document out. Slowly.
Carefully.
The paper felt different now. Heavier. Not physically, but in meaning. I unfolded it once. Then again. Robert's handwriting at the top.
Clear. Familiar.
I didn't need to read it again. I already knew what it said.
But I wanted to feel it in my hands.
A reminder. This wasn't just reaction. This was preparation. Years in the making. I folded it back. Neatly. Then slipped it into the inner pocket of my handbag. Closer. More secure. Across the room, Pamela spoke to the coordinator again. Her gestures sharper now. Less controlled. Richard stood beside her, his shoulders tighter than before. They weren't solving anything. They were containing it. Trying to keep it from spreading. Trying to keep it quiet. I understood that instinct. I had lived it for years. Smoothing things over. Absorbing discomfort. making sure no one else had to feel it. But tonight, I wasn't doing that anymore.
A slow song began.
Couples returned to the dance floor. Emily and her husband moved back to the center. She was still smiling, still glowing, and I held on to that. Because, whatever came next, it wouldn't touch her. Not if I had anything to say about it. I adjusted my shawl once more, took a small step back. Not away, just into position. Because the next part wasn't about reacting. It was about timing. And for the first time that night, I knew exactly when to move. The night didn't fall apart. Not the way people expect. There was no shouting, no scene, no dramatic moment where everything stopped and all eyes turned. Instead, things continued. Music played, guests danced, drinks were poured, and yet something underneath it all had shifted so completely that it couldn't be undone. I stayed near the edge of the room, not hiding, not withdrawing, just no longer participating the way I used to. From where I stood, I could see everything clearly now. Not just what was happening, but what it meant. Pamela had stopped moving as much. Earlier, she had been everywhere. Now, she stayed close to the coordinator, her voice lower, her movements tighter. Richard wasn't speaking much at all anymore. He stood beside her, occasionally checking his phone, occasionally glancing across the room,
Toward me.
every time. I didn't look away, because there was nothing left to avoid. A few guests approached me over the next half hour. Polite, careful. Everything all right? Such a beautiful evening, isn't it? You must be so proud. I answered all of them the same way. Yes. And I meant it, because pride and disappointment can exist in the same space. Emily was still happy, still celebrating. That part remained untouched. And that was enough. At some point, Daniel returned to stand beside me again. He didn't say anything at first. We just watched. They didn't expect you to hold your ground, he said eventually.
No, iraplia.
They thought this would pass like everything else. I nodded once. It always did before. He studied me for a moment. What changed, he asked. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth wasn't a single moment. It wasn't the name tag. Not the speech. Not even the conversation about the money. It was all of it. Layered. Repeated. Ignored for too long. I stopped explaining it away. I said finally. That was all. Daniel nodded slowly. That'll do it, he said. We stood in silence again after that. Not uncomfortable. Not heavy. Just settled. Across the room, Pamela and Richard spoke with the coordinator one last time. Longer this time. More intense. Then something changed. Not in their words. I couldn't hear those. But in their posture. Pamela's shoulders dropped, just slightly. Richard exhaled in a way that looked resigned. They weren't fixing it anymore. They were accepting it. That was the moment. Not loud. Not obvious. But final. Because once someone shifts from control to acceptance, there's no going back to the illusion. A few minutes later, Richard started walking toward me again. Slower this time.
No urgency. No frustration.
Just something quieter. He stopped in front of me. Not too close. Mom, he said. I looked at him. Yes. There was a pause. Longer than before.
I
didn't realize, he started, then stopped. Didn't realize. I waited. But he didn't finish the sentence. Because he couldn't. Not without saying something he wasn't ready to admit. It's been a long night, he said instead. Yes, I agreed. Another pause. We'll take care of the rest, he added. I nodded. I know you will. He looked at me for a moment longer.
Searching.
For what? I wasn't sure. Forgiveness. Reassurance. Something familiar. But he didn't find it. Because I wasn't offering it. Not tonight. Emily doesn't know, he said quietly.
I'm glad, irreplid.
And I meant that too. He nodded once. Then stepped back. Not abruptly. Just accepting the distance. And this time, he didn't come any closer. I watched him return to Pamela. Watched them stand side by side. Not speaking. Just present. The music softened again. Another slow song. Couples moved gently across the floor. The night was beginning to wind down. Not in chaos. Not in failure. but in something quieter, something more honest. I adjusted my shawl one last time, took a slow breath, and for the first time that evening, I felt no tension, no questions,
No hesitación.
because everything that needed to be understood had been. The night should have ended quietly. That's what they expected. A few more dances, a few more smiles. Then everyone would leave, and whatever tension existed would disappear with the music. That's how it always worked. But this time, I did.
Politely.
Others shifted in their seats. I'm Emily's grandmother. Emily turned toward me, surprised, but still smiling. And tonight, I continued, I've been given a very special title. A few nervous laughs. I touched the name tag, still pinned to my dress. The old lady who's paying for everything. This time the room didn't laugh. Silence spread.
Slow.
Heavy. I let it sit, because silence tells the truth better than noise ever could. I didn't plan to say anything tonight, I continued. My voice didn't rise, didn't shake, but I realized something important. I paused, looked directly at Richard, then at Pamela. When someone tells you who you are in front of a room full of people, I held the name tag up slightly. You should believe them. No one moved. And they're right, I said. Another pause. I did pay for this wedding. A ripple through the room. The venue. The food. The dress. The flowers. Each word landed heavier than the last. And I did it gladly. I softened my voice slightly. Just enough. For Emily. I looked at her, and she looked back, confused now. But here, support has been withdrawn. A sharp intake of breath somewhere in the room. That includes future gifts, trust distributions, and any funding tied to family events. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Everything has been restructured. I looked at Emily again, softly. Your future is still secure? I said gently. Then back to Richard and Pamela. But access to it is no longer yours to control. That was the moment.
Because you could see it.
Not just shock.
Loss.
Real, immediate loss. Pamela stepped forward. Loretta, this is not appropriate, she started. I raised my hand slightly. Not aggressively. Just enough. This is exactly where it belongs, I said.
Calm.
Final. You made it public. I glanced down at the name tag one last time. I'm just responding the same way.
No anger. No checking.
Just truth. I handed the microphone back to the DJ.
And stepped down. No ruse. No hesitation.